Good evening, everyone. Welcome to On the Spot here at Little Africa News, where we do our weekly roundup of the latest political news and current events. My name is Mona Davids, and I am the host of On the Spot. This evening's guests are Leonardo, Coello, Michael Oliva, and Dion Powell. Mr. Powell will be joining us in a few minutes. He's just a bit delayed. When he comes on, he'll be able to introduce himself, but we'll start first with Mr. Oliva. If you could please just share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
Done this a few times, so I'll be short. Michael Oliva, President of Sykes Global Communications, strategic communications, PR, and political consulting firm in New York City.
Thank you. And Leonardo? You are mute.
Leonardo Coello, community activist and political strategist.
Okay, well, there's been a lot going on this week, so I say we just dive right into it. Leonardo, we're in the Bronx. We're from the Bronx. So let's talk about the big latest Bronx shakeup in local politics, and that's the announcement from Assemblyman Victor Pachado that he is resigning. So, I mean, were you as surprised and shocked as everybody else?
Yeah, I was, Mona. I mean, but in a way, not surprised. For for a few, I'll say for the last maybe like 2 years, it seems like the Bronx politics every few months seems to drop a bomb on the local politics. So I was surprised of who the individual was, but I wasn't surprised that another shakeup happened in Bronx politics.
Recently, like you said, we've had quite a few surprises in the Bronx, especially when it comes to our Latino community. First big surprise was Ruben Diaz Jr. deciding that he will not run for mayor. Next surprise was Marcos Crespo abruptly resigning to take that position at Montefiore. Now we have Victor Pachado. I mean, what is going on with the Bronx's Latino class? Michael, do you have any thoughts on this? Have you seen, changes like this going on in other boroughs?
I really don't see a parallel as far as ethnic group in another borough. I mean, 3 does seem like quite a coincidence, and you wonder if people see the political writing on the wall. Maybe there's not necessarily, and Leonardo would know about this much more than I would, but not necessarily sort of a progressive sweep, but it's maybe sort of an anti-establishment sweep. And maybe people are feeling like, this is sort of a good time to bow out instead of like staying in this long-term battle where every year is going to be a struggle for re-election against whether it's sort of a DSA candidate or a more conservative candidate, not necessarily like a party candidate. And perhaps that's something that's consistent in what these people are thinking, but I don't have a great answer for it.
So when we look at the city council races, there were some DSA-backed candidates. They did quite well. Looking at the state races for next year, Michael, do you foresee DSA and Working Families Party either running candidates separately for some seats, or do you see them working together? Do you think that DSA is going to make a serious push when it comes to next year's primaries?
Well, I'll say this. I do feel that there is sort of a movement in the opposite direction politically again, amongst many groups. Not necessarily conservative, but certainly towards more of a moderate approach. And what we found out, and what we talked about a few episodes ago, was vote splitting, even in ranked choice, still seemed to work. I mean, you'd often have one sort of DSA type candidate, and you'd have 5 or 6 other candidates who, because of matching funds, decided they were going to run for city council, take a chance. There's a lot going on, and who knows what may happen. That's a little tougher in state races where it may be 2 candidates, 3 candidates at the most, and then it's not really a situation where you win with 30-40% of the vote. You actually have to break 50% on many occasions, or at least win a plurality of the vote. So I think my prediction is it will be less effective.
I see that. I agree with you on that. I think that, it did seem like there was this DSA, this push or this DSA wave, but I think Eric Adams winning the Democratic primary somewhat showed us otherwise, because Eric's platform is definitely not DSA aligned. So I think that's going to be very interesting to watch and see. But speaking of the state assembly, this week, Assemblyman Speaker Hasty, put out an announcement that the assembly will not move forward with impeaching Cuomo. And there was quite a backlash about his announcements. Some assembly members, especially judiciary members, felt blindsided. And then the next day, after the outrage, after the backlash, Speaker Hasty said that the assembly will still issue a report on their investigation. The reason that Speaker Hasty said that they will not continue with the impeachment is because they said that the assembly's attorneys advised them that it's not possible to continue with the impeachment since Cuomo resigned. So, question, Leonardo, how much of that do you think is political? Do you think that perhaps the assembly should have gone ahead with the impeachment, or as Speaker Hasty did, listen to the advice of the lawyers and issue a report on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Governor Cuomo was very strategic of how he handled things, right? Giving that 14-day notice really shortened the window of how a lot of things could be handled, right? And so, and then kind of tied Hasty's hands a little bit, because in order for the impeachment process to properly go through, it would have to happen within those 14 days that technically he was still the governor, right? Because, the way the language kind of reads is like the impeachment process is supposed to be focused on somebody who's in office. But then that made it a little bit unfair for the assembly, because then now an investigation that the attorney general had months to put together, all of a sudden you're going to be asking the assembly to review and to make a decision on in 14 days if you're going to go ahead and push for the impeachment and stuff. And so I think, Cuomo was very strategic of how he did things and how he set himself up, because it tied people's hands. And I think at this point, Hasty's is just the doing of the report is really just kind of trying to throw a little red meat at folks that are still a little unsatisfied of how things turned out.
Okay. We are finally joined by Dion Powell. Dion, if you could take a minute to introduce yourself, and then I don't know if you heard my full question regarding Speaker Hasty's decision, or the Assembly's decision and their lawyers not to move forward with an impeachment of Cuomo, but instead do a report on, on their investigation. Dion?
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly. I'm County Committeeman Dion Powell of the 79th Assembly District, founder of the New York Free Thinking Democrats on Facebook, and I'm a political consultant, all right. Now, to answer your question, one of the things that I focused on, because I said, most minority people like myself don't care about the impeachment, was that a lot of people behind the scenes were going for Cuomo's throat for everything he's done. They wanted to see this man lose everything, including not be able to run again for elected office and also take away his whole retirement elected official pension package for all of his years of service. So that's what the impeachment, as I understand it, was going to do. However, Speaker Carl Hastie, under the pressure of the public, still wants to, I guess, make someone happy out of all this by doing this investigation. But seeing as though there's not really much consequences, as I see it, from this, then it's going to be a pretty much waste of time and dog and pony show, unless outside of this the courts bring criminal charges on him, which I understand might happen as well. So,
Okay. Dion, I also want to get your thoughts on a question that I asked Mike and Leonardo about Victor Pichardo. With his recent resignation, with Diaz Jr.'s decision to retire from public life and not run for mayor, and of course Marcos Crespo resigning abruptly and going to Montefiore. Do you do you see, or do you think, or what are your thoughts on so many Latino leaders now exiting public life in the Bronx? And do you see something similar like this happening with other leaders, whether they're Black or Latino in other boroughs?
well,
And who do you think?
okay.
Hold on 1 second before I forget. Because since you are a county committeeman, who do you think county is probably going to choose as their appointed successor?
Okay, that's a lot to tackle. And we have all these wonderful guest speakers here. All right, I've known Victor Machado for some time now. Him and his lovely wife, Glenda Delis. He actually, I believe, used to work for Gustavo back in the day at Montefiore, and I'm sorry to see him go. But so Latino leadership is always going to be here, even though I understand Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. is worried about the Black stronghold, but that's his problem. Um, Over there, the Dominican power hold of SBI is starting to spread further east from the Heights. And as you may or not know, one of three Bronxites now is becoming Dominican. So, as I understand it from my sources, Yadelka Tapia, who is the district leader, as I'm a county committeeman, the election law states that the county committee of the assembly district will have to have a special meeting in order to vote on who will have the Democratic line. So once whoever has the Democratic line in that special election, then automatically, theoretically, they're going to win. Now, once again, back to election law, as I understand it, because he resigned before September 20th, that means the special election, as I understand it, automatically goes to the general election. So that way, I guess it will save some money, as I understand it. But Yadelka Tapia, from my understanding, has appointed a lot of county committee people to the committee, whereas I was elected. But after election of a county committee, the Bronx Democratic County district leaders can actually appoint county committee members for this purpose. Hopefully, I tackled all those points.
Yes, you did. I will say that yes, in many cases, it is supposed to be that process. That's supposed to be the process, but that hasn't necessarily happened in previous years. But then again, Udelka is a force to be reckoned with. So we'll see what's going to happen. I want to talk about our current Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, and her recent meetings here in New York City. So, of course, she met with our mayor, who I hope is not considering running. But she also met with Jumaane Williams, our public advocate, who ran against Hochul in the last election for lieutenant governor, and who is considering running for governor. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on that? On Jumaane doing that New York One interview, saying that he is still considering running for governor after he met with Hochul this week.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the first time he ran for lieutenant governor, it was sort of like an overreach. It was like, let's see what happens here. And, interestingly enough, sometimes it's easier to run for a bigger office because you're above the radar and it doesn't take the same amount of resources or even diligence to break through or sophistication because you're getting sort of de facto attention by, the nature of what you're running for. So he did very well. And it really set him up for the public advocate's race to a point where it was fairly, I'm not going to say easy, but he was the favorite the whole way through. And so in a way, running for lieutenant governor again for someone like him, he's aiming higher, I think. And the thing about Giuliani is, love it, hate it, or in between, he really is, now that Eric Adams has won, he's sort of the foil and the symbol of the left. He really is sort of a leader. Alexandria is in DC, in a lot of ways, she sort of follows what Pelosi does. There's a lot of rhetoric, but the votes aren't necessarily out there or anything that's what people would call, Justice Democrat type politics. So there's a difference between the rhetoric and what actually happens in a lot of cases. With Giuliani, that's not necessarily true. So in a lot of ways, he's the homebred symbol of the left. And in a Democratic primary, that's a very powerful position to run from. And I think lieutenant governor for him right now is be aiming too low.
Leonardo, what are your thoughts on Giuliani's interview on New York One, clearly stating he's considering running, but he's waiting on announcing his decision until after the transition of Hochul's to governor?
Me personally, if I was advising Giuliani, I would be a little more concerned than I think most people are with his, potential to be governor, right? I think when he ran for lieutenant governor, he at that time probably wasn't, as Michael mentioned, the face of the progressive left wing of the Democrat, machine and stuff, right? He wasn't that completely yet. He kind of became that de facto when becoming public advocate, and then with his stance on, all of the social matters, issues that were coming up as well too, and him, kind of taking the lead on being the voice of, reform the police, defund the police, and a lot of other things. He kind of became that. And so now if he steps back into that, kind of state arena, he's kind of going in there with a bit of a different image now. And I think there's something that you have to be a little cautious with that about on a state level and stuff. To me also, just personally, I think the public advocate isn't really a policy position and stuff. And so I'm concerned of how running for governor with nothing really so much to lean on a policy level, would affect Giuliani on that level as well too.
Yeah, just to, I'm going to disclose something. I actually wrote his platform for when he ran for lieutenant governor, and a lot of it had to do.
Really?
Yeah, it's like 20 pages. I don't know how I got so long, but it had to do with him sort of taking a bully pulpit position, or not even one that didn't have much tangible power, and sort of saying, I'm gonna take this office and transform it into something where I actually advocate. And the same model can be brought for a public advocate, right? It's sort of like, you don't have subpoena power. You have a small staff, a small budget. You can write reports, and Mark Green really ultimately, when he became the president of the city council and the public advocate, sort of showed people like, I used to work in his office, and people used to be afraid of him. They didn't know he couldn't do anything, right? It was all just like news coverage. So, I mean, in some ways, the policies are one thing, but he's molded himself as such an advocate who can sort of like increase the power of an office beyond what it's mandated to do. And his message is going to be, imagine when I do have the power, to to his progressive allies, and I think that's a strong message, especially if you have 3 or 4 moderate candidates running against him, and it looks like there may be a few. So I wouldn't count him out. And as we said last show, then you think about who's running as a Republican.
Yeah, no. So, Mike, I'm not definitely counting Jumaane out. What concerns me more is the possibility of the damage that it can cause to the Democratic Party, right, with him, pulling, the left side to the progressives, and you got the Democratic moderates, and then all of that infighting, and then kind of a moderate Republican sneaks in, and then now we're in a general, and the state goes to a Republican. That's where I think some of my concern is.
No, I think we agreed on that last show, definitely. It's funny because you brought up census data before the show. Queens is actually, I saw a recent article that said there's sort of a disconnect between voters of color and the progressive movement. And Queens is more Republican now than it's been in 20 years. And it's not because there's more white people. First of all, when we talk about white people and you say, well, it's less white. Well, it's less white in one way. It's more white in another kind of white people, right? So it depends on what kind of white people you're talking about. You're talking about white ethnic people leaving, of course, but there are people who come from other parts of the country and populate the borough. But Thomas Frank, who wrote What's the Matter with Kansas, said that, he lives in the wealthiest, I don't know if I discussed this yet, I just saw it on Matt Taibbi's podcast, city in Kansas, and he said all the rich people who used to vote Republican are now voting Democrat. And in Queens, you're seeing that Black and Latino voters maybe aren't switching registration, but are becoming more conservative. And, we always talk about, well, will the populist left and the populist right ever unite? Well, it may be inevitable if you have a Democratic Party, which is the elite party, and everybody else, which is feeling like they're sort of left out. And in that sense, that's where I think Leonardo makes a good point, which is like, if Jumaane wins, like everybody else is going to be saying, like, I don't know if I could do this anymore. And the Democratic Party runs into trouble. And, even if the Republican candidate's rhetoric is moderate, that doesn't mean when he or she takes office, that's what actually ends up happening.
No, that's true. What I found interesting, talking about this census data, is that when it comes to a lot of people, you may think, well, actually, when it comes to not just the census data, but also looking at the ranked choice voting data as well. But we have a lot of Black Americans, African immigrants, West Indian people who may be registered as Democrats, but they are moderate Democrats. They do not necessarily agree with Jumaane and defunding the NYPD or abolishing the police or removing our school safety agents from our schools. And I don't see how Jumaane's agenda and his policies are going to work outside of New York City, because I don't see folks upstate being okay with defunding the police. I don't see folks upstate okay with, their children not having any type of safety, the school security or school safety officers. So when I look at it, when it comes to the general, if Jumaane does end up being the Democratic nominee, I see a lot of people when they go into that election booth in November 2022, perhaps voting for that Republican candidate. I mean, and like you said, Michael, we look at Queens. Queens right now, the white population has declined. The Spanish and Asian population has increased tremendously. And Queens now is more Republican than anything else. And just a few days ago, after our last On the Spot show, Lee Zeldin, and I actually tweeted it, Lee Zeldin met with a group of Asian American community leaders and nonprofit leaders. And I know the people in that in that group, and they are a powerful force to be reckoned with.
Well, Mona,
That's the thing.
Mona, you're saying Republican like it's a bad thing. Lee Zeldin was also in the Bronx too at a Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. event at Maestro. So there's a lot of conservatives here as well. Like I said, I have a lot of interesting people in the third parties as well. But to connect the dots for you, let's go with the redistricting for Jumaane. Jumaane Williams, as I see it historically, does a lose to win scenario when it comes to popularity spilling over. He could be doing this again if it's a crowded field. Like if Alexandria Biaggi from the Bronx decides to run and split all that vote, he can actually do a lose-win scenario and may run for Congress if Nadler or Maloney's district lines, spill over to his area. And that's what I see him might do in the future for 2024. Because once again, 2024 is going to be a lot of fireworks as well. But back to the liberal progressive agenda, a lot of people are seeing through DSA, and Mike, you mentioned Justice Democrats earlier, and a lot of minority people, especially that are switching more conservative or purple, are seeing through Jumaane Williams, rhetoric and saying, wait a minute, you have private security, guy. What's this got to defund our police for, our school safety agents? So you have a lot of choices to make.
He lives on a military base.
And you live on a military base. And this is the thing. I know quite a few people, and I even said it last week, I would be one of them, where if Jumaane does run for governor, I'll be out there letting people know this man wants to defund the NYPD. We're under siege in New York City. Every freaking day I hear someone being shot, and it's usually a teenager. But, Jumaane seems to be okay with it because he wants to defund the NYPD. He wants to remove our school safety agents from our schools when they keep our kids safe. But he lives on a military base protected by military police. He has an NYPD security detail. The hypocrisy is astounding. And again, like when people go into that voting booth, this is one thing I do know, is that if Democrats want to lose the governorship to a Republican, the best, most effective way they can do that is have Jumaane Williams be their Democratic candidate. That I think will do it. Then we will go red. But we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen with that.
Right. It's also interesting that somebody brought up Dion, I think, brought up the Asian community in Zeldin. There's with Asian voters, it's less ideological, and there's a lot of transactional nature to it, which is sort of like, what are you going to do for our community? If you want to vote in Confucius Plaza, they want to talk about, can you make the stoplight go longer for us crossing the street, right? And no matter what your politics are, Zeldin, there's a visa that's I forget what it's called. You guys might know, where people who are from Guatemala and Mexico can come here for 6 months and work in the summer. They often work for landscaping companies, and Trump had sort of like shut it all down as part of his efforts, quote unquote, like stop illegal immigration, even though it was completely legal. There were some local landscapers were upset. They went to Zeldin. He figured out how to sort of like change that for them. That wasn't really left or right. And he may not like actually put that in his campaign, but and some of these people were in an area that was very liberal minded. So it's like that transactional stuff on the ground is very powerful. And sometimes if somebody's like obsessed with rhetoric, and I said, the other week, obsessed with, what bathroom you're using, and somebody else is like, hey, I can take care of your issue, that can be very powerful. And that sort of dichotomy may work for the Republicans.
I agree, because the people I know in East Long Island are very proud with Lee Zeldin, Democrat or otherwise.
Right.
And
you never saw a Trump sign. You saw a lot of Biden signs and a lot of Zeldin signs. And it was like, yeah, you may think that's insane, but that's what people were like.
Well, he does his job, and you got to give credit where it's due. Green, blue, or red, and he does his job. And like I said, you can't just say scream racism in a room and these people will vote for you. Lee Zeldin have the facts. Eastern Long Island, you have ownership, education, you have access to all that leadership there, and it doesn't work that way on Eastern Long Island. But for the rest of New York State against Jamani Williams, I don't know. These progressives and DSA, they might come out of the woodwork because you have, if you're going to do identity politics, which we always do, you have this white woman right there who I'm sure they could stir the pot and blame her for some of Cuomo's ills and then her husband's issues as well. Then if AOC jumps in the race and Alexander Biaggi jumps in the race with more women, Jamani Williams may be able to pull an upset. But the general election, with enough Republican support, maybe, but still, this is a Democratic show.
Interesting. Hochul also met with John Liu, State Senator John Liu, our former comptroller, and with our school chancellor, Misha Porter. And she toured a school in Queens. And, during that visit, as was reported by the New York Post, John has a lot of concerns regarding Mayor de Blasio and the Department of Education's readiness when it comes to reopening schools. And it kind of feels like deja vu because we were here last year. And even though we know more about COVID, it doesn't seem like they're really prepared. De Blasio is not offering a remote option to parents. A lot of parents want that remote option, but we still don't know what the plan is. They're saying they're going to keep kids 3 feet apart, but the principals union, just blasted de Blasio and the DOE because they're saying that that's simply not possible. We're going to probably have to go into some type of hybrid or cohort learning structure. So my question, Leonardo, you are the father of 2 boys, right? I think both of them are now in high school. Are they both in high school? So just as a parent, like, what are your views on the reopening process? And do you feel in any way, do you feel better knowing that Hochul is interested in knowing what this plan is, that she's getting involved right now? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, Mona, I'll be honest with you. This is probably the topic that I'm most, I guess, for lack of a better word, pessimistic about and stuff. I just feel like, these conversations are happening too late. These conversations should have happened months ago with whoever was in office, Cuomo, whoever. These conversations should have been happening. We get a new, chancellor that came in, and I'm sorry, but those conversations should have already been in place already and stuff. And Kathy Hochul now, kind of doing these tours, and to me, I just feel like it's not going to really have that much of an impact. Schools open up in a matter of a couple weeks, and it really feels like Groundhog Day, as a horror movie, when it's like it's happening over, the same thing is happening. And I just can't believe that we haven't learned anything from the mistakes that we made in the past. Like the one lesson that I think should have been learned by any elected official, anybody in leadership, was act quickly. Like if there's one thing that anybody should have took from this, would be, you have to move quickly, and then make your adjustments as you go and stuff. But it just seemed like everyone just let this drag out. Nobody wanted to take ownership of it, and honestly, it's just going to be the same thing over again. Kids just losing out another year, and the educational gap is just going to continue to grow for our communities.
I mean, going back to, why didn't Hasty impeach? I mean, there are people across the state upset that, Cuomo, who seemed like the adult on the issue, is not only leaving, but then you're going to use our taxpayer money to go after him. When, he was sort of seen as a check to de Blasio, who just he doesn't seem like a serious person. The guy was giving out hamburgers to get vaccinated. The very thing that, like, sort of makes you less healthy and probably more susceptible to getting the virus, and it's like, and I think Leonardo's right. I feel like when this first happened, parents were like, just tell us what the plan is. We will adapt to that plan. Like, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. But we just need to know what it is. Are the kids staying home? Are they going? Is it a hybrid? I got to arrange a babysitter. I got to get to work. I got to do all these different things. And you're not telling me what exactly is going on. And I feel like that doing a tour of the school isn't enough. I do think you need decisive action. I also feel that everything with coronavirus is so locked up in politics. Back in the time of the Spanish flu, it wasn't like you had political views, but you weren't on a team. And I feel like there's insanity on every side of this issue. Like there are people who won't get vaccinated because, Democrats who want to get vaccinated. There are Democrats who just want to obsess over coronavirus and just can't do anything. And serious people aren't getting together and finding solutions. They're worried about what team they're on. And I feel like that, we're in a dire situation, especially when it comes to children, because they need leadership from adults. And if they don't get it, they're not going to get the education that they need,
No, I mean, I think Leonardo is right, because it really does feel the best description is a groundhog nightmare. And if it turns out that we don't even open for the school year on time, that's going to cause so much havoc for parents as well as for the students. And I don't understand why more of our so-called elected officials, including our public advocate, isn't that the job, but why aren't more people demanding answers? Why aren't more of our elected officials saying, what is the plan? Show us something. Like, what is the plan? When you have the principals union coming out saying that they're not getting answers, they are worried, they don't see how this is going to work, we have a problem. But again, it seems like COVID is such a politicized issue right now. Everything with COVID is politicized. And the children are going to be the ones that are going to suffer, because there's already 1 year of learning loss and they need to catch up. So it's very disappointed. I don't know about Leonardo, but for me as a parent, I'm very disappointed that we are in this situation again. And nothing has changed, and we're 2 to 3 weeks out from the first day of school. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. And unfortunately, none of our elected officials are holding this mayor and the Department of Education accountable.
And Mona, the younger the child gets, the more questions, right? Because I have, mine are a little older. They're both in high school and they're both vaccinated. But what about the parents of the under 12, right? Their children they're not even vaccinated yet. So what's the answer for them? Kathy Holcomb is walking around just saying, well, when I get into office, there's going to be a mask mandate. Okay. What else? I don't see it happening. I don't know what's going to happen. I think the ball's going to be punted in so many directions. Time is going to keep passing by. You'll see a whole bunch of more resignations, and people will be leaving just so they won't be tied up into taking the fault of what all this is going to happen.
No, you're right. I foresee the same. It's that time, and I think a lot of those resignations have started to happen. Just one last question on Hochul, on our Lieutenant Governor Hochul. There was an article in the paper talking about how she's looking, how she's exploring or seriously looking at Bronx State Senator Jamal Bailey and Harlem State Senator Brian Benjamin as her lieutenant governor picks. And she'll make the decision, she'll announce it after she's sworn in as our governor. My question, Dion, What are your thoughts on Hochul picking a downstate Black American man as her running mate? And do you think that will help her if, say, someone like Tish or Jamani decides to run?
Wow, you asked me all the tough questions. I want to ask the education question as the non-parent here, but okay, I'll tackle this. I think that a lot of people are starting to see through blatant identity politics, as I mentioned earlier. And some of the people I talk to here in the Bronx and beyond, I love State Senator Bailey. I've known him since he was the district leader up there. I love Brian Benjamin since he was the community board chair. But yeah, it's just blatant identity politics. And I think that might actually hurt her in the long run. And then if Tish James decides to get froggy and jump into the race next year with the rest of everybody else, then long term this may hurt more than help. They're good leaders in their own right, these two gentlemen. But as I see it now, when someone asks me on another show I'm on Fridays, who I think it should have been if it was a Black man, I thought, say, Senator James Sanders would have been a better choice, because at least you can see he's not really with a machine per se, and he has his own position. But these two gentlemen, a lot of people see they come with the baggage of a historical machine behind them and a lot of constituency. But it has to be a person of color per se. So why couldn't it have been a Latino male? That's not controversial. I don't know.
What do you think, Mike?
I think that's a very thought-provoking answer. I think if you were in a lab and you said, well, who's the right pick? And, Brian Benjamin or Jamal might make sense, but and here's the strain that's run through everything that we've all agreed on, which is like there's a lot of big things happening, and I think voters of every color are going to be intelligent enough to say, I want to know who's running the state. Not the person who's going to cut the ribbons is not going to make or break your vote. And I'm not. Like I said, in theory, great picks. Will it matter? I think the message and the actions will matter more.
Do you think either of those picks may deter Tish from running or may deter Jamani from running?
No, I mean, if you have if you had a nonpartisan election for president and there was a Black person running for president and one for vice president, people voting ethnically would vote for the Black person if they were voting ethnically, right, running for president. So I don't think it helps you get Black votes against the Black candidate to have a Black person running as the lieutenant governor. So I don't think it would be dissuasive at all.
Okay, Leonardo, what are your thoughts on it? And what do you think of Dion's suggestion that maybe she should have, maybe she should choose a Latino male to run with her?
I don't think there's anybody right now that will move the needle for her from a Latino perspective on the state level. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion, I think that Kathy Holcomb and her team are doing the old magic trick, when you wash my hand over here and then I'm doing something over here. And I think that these names are being put out there. But if I was advising Kathy Holcomb, I would say to reach out to Assemblywoman out in Brooklyn, Ranice. Because if your two biggest competitors are coming out of Brooklyn, right? You're talking possibly Tish James and Jamani Williams. If you want to impact their base, you go for probably one of the most powerful women in that borough and stuff, and you then now move the narrative to your side, right? You have a woman as well for lieutenant governor. She is a Black woman as well too, and so you begin to take a little bit of that narrative steam off of Tish James. You start to build a little bit of more of a coalition out in Brooklyn, where we know, Brooklyn is a very strong voting bloc that can move the needle. The Brian Benjamin thing makes absolutely no sense to me. Most of his district is more white than Black now, and I don't think he did that well even in his own district in his last race. The Jamal Bailey thing, not sure what that means. I don't think he can really move that much of the needle. he could get her a lot of votes here in the Bronx, especially in his district. And the narrative recently has been with the Eric Adams win that the Bronx can be a game changer for you, but at the end of the day, you got to make a decision based off who your opponent is going to be. And I think the smartest thing would be for her to reach out to Assemblywoman Ranice.
Well, there's too many, all three positions of the city, mayor, public advocate, and I believe comptroller from Brooklyn. So I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, we talked about the complexity of Brooklyn a few shows ago, and Rodney's, is the Caribbean American diaspora. We talked about all the countries and the pride that they would take, because you can't just say black like you can't just in Brooklyn, like you can't just say white in Queens, right? Yeah. And it's like that would be a sort of a movement as really a first a statewide elected official. Although Jamani did it on the city level. And that I think a lot of African Americans. So you talk about the 42nd, the 43rd, maybe whatever the Perry's is. I don't remember all the numbers. And then the African American population in the 56th or 57th have been here for a while. They might be saying, "I want to know what the leader is going to do." This isn't. I don't want to make history. I want to know how you're going to solve my problems. So I think in that sense, if you want to do an ethnic thing, Rodney's does make a lot of sense, because there would be a lot more history to it.
Yes, Ronnie does make a lot of sense, but I don't know. I will be very surprised. I would be genuinely surprised if Ronise were to decide to run for lieutenant governor. I mean, I personally have known Ronise since when she ran against Rhoda. And that was her first race, and she lost that race. So, and she came back, and she came back stronger, and now she's the first woman who is the chair of Bronx County, and she's busy building quite a little political kingdom for herself in Brooklyn. She's very powerful, and for me, I think her running for lieutenant governor would just kind of diminish what she's doing. I think she can do more where she is.
Well, I understand from my network in Brooklyn, she comes with a lot of baggage. And if she was on the road, I don't know if we could talk about this on the show, but if she were going to be
on the spot, so we are on the spot, we tell it like it is. So yes, we do know she has her folks, those reformers that have a problem with her.
But if Kathy were going to appoint her, Haiti is in the news, and the Haitian community is up and coming in Brooklyn, which is a little controversial in itself. But so Rodney's does come with some baggage there. But all eyes are always on downstate as who is going to be the second in command between now and then. But de Blasio's making a lot of noise and a lot of moves, so we'll see what goes on to next year.
De Blasio's out on stages rapping, bro. Like he's the Slick Rick and stuff. Like I think he's a rap.
Wait, let me just say too, though, that I was taking it back to that lab I was talking about. I mean, if you're gonna go ethnic, like, be inventive about it, But yeah, I mean, and I mentioned that she lost her own assembly district in the surrogates race. It was a white candidate and who won all these Caribbean and African American districts, and she was the county leader, and that's what the county leader cares about, is the surrogate race. It's like county politics. So vote getting ability is maybe another thing, but I was really jumping on Leonardo's point, which is like, if you want to grab a constituency, think beyond just skin color and like what part of that constituency you're trying to grab.
Yes, that's a very important observation, Mike, with that surrogates race. I think Musa worked on that race.
Yeah, we both did. I was on it too.
Okay, yes.
That's why I know the numbers, but it was fascinating. I mean, you talk about 42, 43, 56, 57. There was
Mhm.
another one in there. So both Caribbean and African American districts, you know, and she's the county leader. She wanted that one. So, you know, I'm just giving you another side to that picture.
Yeah, no, it's for me, I think that she should stay where she is. I don't think she should consider running as Hochul's running mate. I think there's a lot more that she can do. Um, I hope that she can resolve those issues with those lovely Brooklyn new reformers, her county members, and them down there. But you know, Ranice is another force to be reckoned with. But if I were county and I were her, I would be concerned about that loss of that surrogate race because that says a lot. Um, but just I want to now just briefly excuse me, just briefly talk about national news. Um, And I want to start off with what's going on right now, what's happened in Afghanistan. The U.S. withdrawal is, you know, is this, you know, how is this going to affect Biden? Does this make him look weak? Um, with what's happened in Afghanistan, with people dying on the tarmac, the young teen boy dying as well. I mean, what on the global stage and also here on the national stage, um, do you think Americans will blame Biden for what's happened, or do you think they'll say, no, this is Trump's fault? I'll start with Dion.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice me and Mike both muted our microphones at the same time with this one. Okay, let's see how I'm gonna tackle this question. Yes, you know, they can't blame Trump for this one because Obama killed Osama, and here we are. And now the transition, because Biden and Harris both claim they could do a better job and clean this up. So far, Harris messed up with the wall situation at the border. Now we're in Afghanistan. But from what I understand, there was no real transition plan. And from what I understand from my sources, that most of the weapons that they have, the Taliban, are our weapons because our people just got up and walked away. So that's a tremendous embarrassment to the Biden administration. But I'm sure with the Democratic machine that Biden has, he'll find a way to positively spin this one. But the folks across the board coming up to the midterm elections and redistricting, I'm not sure they're going to really want to hear it as opposed to see results. On top of that, with the pandemic, some people that are conspiracy theorists in my realm see this as more back to the usual business of deflection, as it were, when it comes to the media playing it. So that's what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that the people, it was the coalition between Crowley and Liz Cheney that stopped Trump from doing the same thing. But I do feel like with COVID, it's the same situation where like you're going to look at it depending on your team, right? It's like if Trump would have done it, the same thing happened. The Republicans would have said we should have left it. You can't stay there forever. But now that Biden did it, it's like, well, you know, it's like how could he do that? And that's just, you know, all that was for nothing, and it would have been the same way, vice versa. You know, every time Trump was less warlike, the Democrats said, "Oh, we should stay in Syria. We should do that." So, like, so much is determined by what side you're on in this situation. But what's fascinating to me is, you know, I almost, you know, I'm going to insert my own opinion into this a little bit. Like, I feel like we need to get out, get out of everywhere, you know, because that's what pisses them off. You know, I mean, it took a day to take Kabul. You know, Biden's blaming the military that was supposedly trained and equipped, and it's like, and he's saying they're not fighting, you know, in the Civil War, and it's like there is no Civil War. They're not fighting. Like, we can't tell them they should want something that they may not want, you know. And my thing is like, who gets this $300 million worth of weapons and technology? The Taliban. I mean, it's almost like, you know, either we would have had to have a base there forever and basically, you know, shadow run the country, or you got to get out. There's not going to be a great transition. They don't want to fight these people. These people will wait you out for hundreds of years if they need to. They need to settle their own differences. And no matter who would have left, I don't know if the situation would have been much different.
Well, I like to add something because I'm in the third party realm, conservative, libertarian, Republican.
Yeah.
Someone pointed out to me something very interesting. They said, Dion, no matter how you feel about Trump, but there was no real international incidents under this administration. And one thing you got to give Trump credit for is that he did try to bring drilling and oil here to our country as supposed to be vested into the Middle East.
Right.
That's why the focus wasn't over there. So that's one thing I just want to put out there for consideration. That
it's only like 10% of the oil. It's like
right, but with our environmentalists here, it's round the point if we drill here, but they don't want to deal with the double-edged sword of having to drill and depending on that. So this all ties into the gas prices at the end of the day. So nobody wants to talk about that.
Leonardo, what's your view on what's happening with the Biden administration and the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Wow. I mean, like Mike said, this is something that has been going on for hundreds of years at the end of the day, right? Quick thought, though, to what Dion's point was, Dion, we are going to remember that we were possibly going to have a nuclear war with North Korea when Trump was in office and stuff, right?
Man, back and forth was our friend one day. Next day,
he was testing out a nuclear missile that could potentially, hit here to
Why
America.
Why aren't we talking about now?
No, because you said that folks were talking about there were no foreign issues when Trump was in office, but we were kind of
wars, no shootings, no attacks.
First of all, the Afghan. Here's the thing, Mona. The Afghan war was all the way back to W. We've been in this war for 20 years. So there were shots being fired during his administration, through Obama's, through Trump's, through Biden's and stuff like that. So people were dying, people were getting killed, war was happening. I agree with Mike. I think it's time for us to get out of a lot of things. I think America needs to start to understand that, the entire globe isn't America, right? And that we have to start to see things, that not everything through our lens, and understand that, people have other views, how their country and how they want to live. And I know that it's important, the role that America has on democracy around the world, and those things that's a very important role. And I think, we should take that serious, but we should also understand that, not everything can be looked at through the American lens every single time and stuff. As far as politics goes, I think the Biden administration, like all of us, we're gonna be okay because the American population has a very short memory with a lot of things and stuff, and so the images look horrible now of people hanging onto planes and everything, but that cycle will happen really, really quick, and there'll be something else will be going on too, and it won't really have that much of an impact, I think, at the end of the day.
The Egyptians, the Greek, the Romans, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Dutch, the French, the English, the Spanish. I mean, everybody has to come to terms with the fact that you can't run the world forever, and maybe that's okay. And we're not in the same time. Not everything in history is completely applicable today, but a lot of things are. And we still have the most powerful military in the world in the way that we can defend ourselves if we were intelligent and also did it on sort of like a cyber level, very adequately without having to sort of run everything. We get serious about alternative energy, and and there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like it's time to stop meddling in all these countries and trying to overthrow people and messing around with drug cartels and all this crazy stuff. Now the Democratic Party is aligned with the CIA and the FBI, and they're running the show. And, these things continue to happen. I mean, you saw that whole thing where there was a plot to kidnap a governor, and like 15 of the 18 people were like in the FBI. It was like, this stuff happened with young Arab men. It's now happening with young white men, and they're trying to frame these people as extremists, and they're someone in their mom's basement, and they're funding them and getting them to do stuff they wouldn't normally do. Like, all this madness just has to stop. I don't know if it ever can, but the military-industrial complex has to be factored into that.
Now that's true. My opinion, my personal opinion is America needs to mind its own business and get out of these situations. Stop meddling in other countries' business. And when it comes to Afghanistan, just leave them be. They've been fighting in that part of the world for centuries, and we just need to have them sort out their own affairs.
It's a country that's like this in the same mountain range too. I mean, the Russians couldn't beat them. They had also an air force, and like it's not an easy thing to do. That's why Bin Laden hid well. And if you remember, he said, like, I just want you out of the Saudi Peninsula. Like that, he wasn't unclear about his intentions. He didn't say we hate America because there's topless bars. It was like, no, we want you to get off of this piece of land, and if we do, maybe they'll stop screwing with us. So anyway, I'm ranting.
Yeah, no, I mean it's time, and now they have their country back, and that's their affairs. I just want to end with one last question that I forgot to ask earlier. The vaccine mandate for indoor activities, restaurants, businesses, gyms, Broadway, the movie theaters, you name it, is now in effect. And there are small businesses and restaurant owners that have filed lawsuits. I know Letitia Romero, also who's running for Staten Island Borough President, she filed a lawsuit. I saw Nicole Malliotakis, the Congresswoman, and Assemblyman Mike Riley and others also. I don't know if they filed their lawsuit, but they had a press conference about it. So, what are you guys' take on these new vaccine mandates? Have any of you been to a restaurant and been asked to show your papers? Have anyone at a restaurant or a gym policed you and asked you for this medical documentation? I'll start with Leonardo.
Yeah, so it's funny, Mona. Me and my fiance, we went to Madison Square Garden to watch the versus battle between the Locks and the Dipset. And we were definitely asked, and you could not enter Madison Square Garden if you didn't have your vaccine card and your ID. But once we were there, it got very cloudy within Madison Square Garden. So I found it hilarious that to get into Madison Square Garden, I had to show this vaccine shot. But while I was in Madison Square Garden, it got very cloudy in there, and as I looked around, and Madison Square Garden had no problem with what was happening around. But nonetheless, I have been to a couple places. They have asked to it. They're not going that hard now because, of course, the penalties and those aspects don't come in for like another week or whatever it is, 2 weeks or something like that. So, but yeah, events and places are definitely starting to do it. My only opinion is I agree with it, to be honest with you. I feel like I'm okay with the mandates and stuff. I know not everybody shares that, but I think at the end of the day, the particular group that comes to mind that makes me worry are the children. And I know everybody has their different views and they want their own rights and the vaccines and everything. But at the end of the day, somebody has to stand up for these children because they're the ones that are going to be the most vulnerable. And that's why I believe in the vaccine mandates.
No, it's interesting that you say that with Madison Square Garden that they checked your ID and your vaccine at the versus battle, but the place got cloudy. It reminded me a couple of days ago, I saw this Facebook video with Jim Jones saying, listen, people, COVID is real. and the folks commenting because he got COVID. So folks were saying, well, he got COVID at the versus battle. So that, that's really interesting. But with Madison Square Garden being okay with it getting cloudy and Styles P singing I Get High, his rap song at the versus battle, I guess everybody got high in Madison Square Garden.
I went to, on Monday, I went to Fridays across from Madison Square Garden, and then went to Bobby Van's, so I was on both ends of the spectrum, and nobody even uttered a word. It was like no mask, no ask for ID. In fact, I heard the Friday staff discussing how are we supposed to do this. The bartender was trying to tell them what they needed to do, so I guess it depends. I would imagine a sports venue would be different, but it is a lot to ask. I'm sorry, every restaurant to sort of police this in a way. I keep finding myself. I tend to agree with the more libertarian side of this one. I feel like to ask people for their personal health information, and I don't not get it, right? Like, of course, like that's a little bit unprecedented in a way, and you didn't go around saying, "Did you get the flu shot?" And I realize the seriousness of the situation, but that's private information as well, and to ask a private company to monitor it on behalf of the government. And we had this discussion last time. I know Leonardo doesn't agree with it. It almost reminds, not everyone says 1984. I'm thinking Brave New World with Soma.
Brave New World, baby.
You had to take this drug. It was like mandatory, but that's my sort of libertarian.
Huxley.
Yeah.
Dion, what's your take on these?
Totally disagree, because the one thing about the third parties is across the board is two words that are dead, which is common sense. Seeing as though all these people, even Israel, are vaccinated and they're still catching COVID, then I don't think that's going to be working out. I know small business owners here in the Bronx, and a lot of people in the Bronx, we don't wear masks, even myself included. And there's a lot of fights and altercations in the bodegas if that question of putting the mask on is raised. Then on top of that, back to de Blasio's rules where there was only certain capacities in restaurants. Most of the people I know personally in their small pizza places just closed their parts with the bathroom and the seating, just had grab to go. The small businesses are hurting. TGI Fridays, Madison Square Garden, they're not going to be affected by this. But the small local mom and pop stores, they're hurting already and they're hemorrhaging. So they went up against Shimwani. They're going to go up against de Blasio and Hooch or whoever's going to pass the laws. And I support them tremendously. And anybody else that stands up to them, fine. But a lot of people got to understand what it's like to own something. And that's what we need here in the Bronx is ownership. Because the more ownership you have, the more conservative your mindset will become. But yeah, I totally disagree with it. And no matter how great in the model New York is, our COVID number rates are still horrible. So it makes no sense what we're being told.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, though, it almost like if you look at the red states, the blue states, you get the feeling no one really knows what to do, and it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, back in the day before we had any sort of science, if you died, you died. If you didn't, you didn't. And then the pandemic was over. So, it's with 330 billion people, and million people, it's hard to navigate.
No, I know that a lot of businesses are not okay with this mandate. I saw a picture of a restaurant in Staten Island owned by, actually a woman-owned business. And she had a sign in her window, a big sign that says, "We do not discriminate based on sex, gender, blah, 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 and vaccination status." So, a lot of businesses have a problem with this added responsibility. They don't believe that they should be the ones, policing everyone else. Everyone is adults. If they want to take it, they take it. If they want to wear a mask, they wear a mask. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with these lawsuits, if any of them are going to get an injunction. But usually in a public health crisis like this, the judge will probably go along with the city and with the mayor's mandate. Michael, I mean, we're talking about just New York City, but are you aware with other parts of the state? Have they implemented something similar to what de Blasio just did with these mandates, requirements for businesses and restaurants to police guests?
I haven't heard another municipality being as strict as the city is right now, or at least what they're suggesting. But you know, the city often leads the way, and the Delta variant seems to be increasing. I can see it happening. Maybe these guys know.
Well, I like how you know people are using other people's rhetoric against them. For example, my aunt lives in Far Rockaway, so we had all those restrictions in New York City, but then we crossed the street into Long Island. We could just sit in the diner and eat. So a lot of people, once again, back to two words of common sense, are not really buying these things anymore or buying into these things anymore. But yeah, I totally support the small businesses and anti-vax, you know, mandates. So even when I came back from Africa and JFK, it's like it falls by the wayside here. It depends on who takes it seriously. So sometimes up to the individual on their personal beliefs, they'll still enforce it or not. So you'd be surprised who speaks up, who just lets it slide, who just walks in and is like, hey, you know, we don't even care. Buy your slice and get out. Nice.
But you got, you know, guys, I don't understand, right? So let's say, like, for example, the drinking age was raised to 21 in like 1984, right? And so then at that point, whoever was selling alcohol, bodegas and everybody else, you know, you were, or let's say cigarettes, right? When the age was raised for cigarettes as well too. And people were asked, businesses were asked that you had to verify somebody's age, like somebody had to show you proof of age, you know, in order to be able to purchase these things and stuff like that. So, you know, business-wise, I'm trying to figure out what's the, you know, what's so different than something like that from a business perspective. They're not asking you to keep logs. They're not asking, all they're asking you is to ask for the identification and the document that shows that somebody was vaccinated.
Well, I guess it's going to do the same thing as always. You know, a lot of people already have the fake ID issue then. They have the fake ID issue now. And some business owners, as we know in the hood, they'll just leave the sign on the door saying what the law is, and then it's free for all when you go in. So that's what I pretty much foresee if this goes forward.
I mean, I would say though that one is sort of, you know, anti-smoking and drinking laws and preventing young people from doing either is sort of it's preventative in the sense that, you know, you're saying like you like are not old enough to make that choice. And I think with the vaccination, you know, it's a choice, but you're not, it's not like the bad thing is the virus. It's not like you're stopping the virus in a direct sense. You're theoretically doing it, you know, and I would also feel better about this if like we had a much, you know, and I need to lose a few myself, but like we need to have a health conversation. Like, we're having all these sort of like solving it after the fact conversations instead of saying like, you know, the probability of dying unless you're much older and, you know, out of shape and, you know, you don't get outside and you don't drink enough water and you don't eat right.
Pre-existing.
You smoke and you drink. There's nothing wrong. No, but in other words, like we can encourage that. We can talk about that, and it's consistent. I think we should encourage people to get vaccinated, right? It's making them do it. That's another thing. But if we're going to make people if we're going to sort of like do that with vaccinations, why aren't we talking about it with public health as well? You know, like.
No, I agree with you, Mike, about that. Like that conversation is very important, especially here in low-income communities. You know, like here in the Bronx, especially, right? With we have some of the worst health statistics and stuff like that. But I just feel like when people are making these arguments about this mandate, right? It's like, this is the reason why I don't believe in it. And then when something is presented to contradict that or to you know to go push back on that, then the opinion switches over here. No, it's because of this. So it's like, originally, even here in this conversation, Dion was like, well, I believe in small businesses and it's going to impact small businesses. I asked the question of how asking for some mandates would impact, you know, the bottom line of a businesses like the bodegas and stuff like that, which is equal And then it was like, well, it's about, free speech and the hood is going to do whatever it does anyway. And so that's just my issue. I'm open to hearing what are the pushback on these things, but I'm not hearing enough of like a deep dive on what these things are and stuff like that. Ultimately, my thing, I'm rooted in the medicine, what doctors are saying, the hospitals, what the hospitals are saying. And at the end of the day, if I need to hear something that could be equivalent to those facts and stuff.
Right.
Well, the thing about it is that the only problem I understand the facts, and we all know the numbers on our level of education, but here in the hood, it's just caused too many conflicts in the bodegas and the small businesses when they bring up the sensitive subject of the mask itself. Oh, we need you to wear your mask in here, sir. So many blow-ups I've seen personally, people dying over bacon, egg, and cheese. That's the only problem I see is the conflict between the consumer and the
pandemic. That's not a COVID issue then. That's not a COVID issue then, Dion, because that same bodega won't let people, there's stores that won't let you in if you got flip-flops on, right? Like if I go to Fine Fair down the block, they have a big sign that says you can't come in here with flip-flops and you can't come here with tank top. What does that mean? Like, and okay, if that's the rules, that's your rules. People should follow them and stuff like that. And if somebody can't follow them, then that's it. But like, I still, like I'm trying to push because I want to understand what's people's pushback on it. And so I ask people to keep mining a little bit for me that information that you're saying. The fact that the hood is going to have an issue with conflict, the hood has an issue with everything. If the price of a bacon, egg, and cheese goes up 50 cents, that's going to be a problem in the hood and stuff. So that's not a good enough dispute.
Well, the only numbers that the business owners throw back, and I agree with, is that the vaccinated are still catching these diseases. So it's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So all small business owners, back to the two words of common sense, like, well, we all have these vaccines and we're going to get a booster. Even if we get the booster, we still are catching the COVID. All these other miscellaneous laws and administrative and stairs, that's just money falling by the wayside. Let's just go by business as usual, and we'll internally create our own rules like we've always been doing.
No, but that again is not correct. Nobody's saying that the vaccine prevents you from getting COVID. What it says is that if you have the vaccine, you won't be hospitalized with the symptoms of COVID and stuff. And so,
and it's hard to transmit.
Right. And so even right now across the country, 98% of the people that are in the ICUs right now are people that were not vaccinated. So we're having a pandemic of the unvaccinated right now. So no one, and if you can send me an email of somebody saying that if you get the vaccination, you cannot get COVID. I have not heard anyone say that. What I've heard people say is if you get it, it's a very likely chance you will not end up in the ICU.
Yeah, but I mean, by the way, a restaurant has the right to do it if they want to, right? I mean, no one's stopping them from asking that. But I'm going to go back to my original point, which is why I feel like this whole political aspect of this, like adults have to get in the room and say, what exactly is the science? Let's level with people. Are we willing to live with risk in our lives, or are we at the cost of perhaps the economy, small and large business, or are we going to say like we have to eliminate risk at all costs? And what's sort of the consent? Not whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, not whether you're rich or you're poor. Like we're all breathing that air, right? So it's like this is why I think it's so essential that people get in a room and have a discussion about this and just level with people, And even the New York Times, they wrote an article about children having psychological effects from COVID with no proof, no sourcing. It was almost like they just came up. They conceptually wrote this article, and I consider myself. I mean, I read the Times. I like it. I consider myself a liberal, but I'm kind of like, no, like that's that. Or they had the evidence about a lab leak before them. They just ignored it. They didn't write the article. Well, people on the left have to follow science as well. It has to be both sides, right? So it's like, I don't know. I just think that the leadership has failed because they've made this whole thing political. We're never going to get the answers that I think Leonardo is looking for because nobody wants to really have an adult discussion.
Well, in order to battle things out, I think on behalf of small business owners, maybe, you know what, let's enforce these rules. But on top of us, gives us some support. You know what? Let's have our leases forgiven for the entire year, like people's rents. Give us some more small business grant money, forgiven, so that we can have a
Or
support system in
UBI.
addition. Yeah, exactly. UBI for small business. I like that, Mike. Something along those lines. What's the incentive of small businesses enacting this in order to support them and keep them sustained and help them compete against the TGI Fridays that across the street or McDonald's that's across the street? That's it.
Hey, Mona, I changed Dion's mind. Hey.
Wow.
That's the goal.
Stranger things have happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, I keep on hearing Dion say two words: common sense. Whenever you start to say that, Dion, every time you said it now in this conversation, the two words that pop into my mind are not common sense. The two words that pop into my mind are freedom and liberty. And for me, this policing, with what's going on and how it's become so highly politicized, for me, it's a very slippery slope. Because it's really infringing on the rights, not just privacy rights, but just in general, our personal rights. It's infringing on our freedom and our liberty. If someone, if someone wants to go and shoot up or, drink whatever, it's their right. Let them go ahead and do it. If they don't want to get a vaccine, guess what? It's their right. Let them go and do it. But expecting small businesses and restaurant owners, expecting them to police people, violating the personal rights of people. I understand it's a public health crisis, but I think we really need to follow the science more on this. We know much more than what we did last year. And I think we're asking too much of business owners. They're already struggling financially. They've been devastated by this pandemic. And now we want to give them additional responsibilities, unnecessarily give them additional responsibilities. So for me, it's not just common sense. To me, it's an infringement of our freedom and our liberty. But that's my opinion.
The counter argument to that is, your rights end where mine begins. So some people could say, look, you didn't get vaccinated. Now I'm going to get COVID. That you're violating my rights. And that's why rights can be a gray area. And I know I'm sounding all over this issue right now, but I also believe that for 4 years we said people on the right were crazy, and the answer isn't be crazy the other way, right? It's not like it's not like ignore science on the other side too when it fits your political argument. And I keep going back to this. It's like everybody, they follow it when it suits their political argument, and they're against it when it doesn't. And all of a sudden, people who call people anti-vaxxers are saying vaccines don't matter. So it's like, again, adult discussion.
That's true. I don't see this debate going away anytime soon. I think we're going to see it, keep coming up, especially when it comes to our schools. With schools reopening, parents are upset about mask mandates. Some parents are attacking teachers that have their kids wear masks in other states. So I don't see this going away anytime soon. But I'm looking at the time. Gentlemen, I just want to say again, thank you so very much for joining us at this week's On the Spot. We covered, quite a few topics. I don't know when Hochul's, when is her swearing in, or when does she take over? Because I guess that'll be on our agenda for next week, and maybe we'll have, we'll know who the lieutenant governor candidate is. But I'm sure between now and next week, a lot is going to happen in New York politics. So I just want to say thank you so very much for joining us this evening to discuss this On the Spot. And I'll see you guys next week On the Spot. And to our viewers, the video will be posted on our website and on our social media pages. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Be safe and be well. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Mona. Good night.
Thank you.